Hey, y'all. So we have just finished the Portuguese-Spanish rivalry. We've kind of unraveled that. We've seen how both those countries have they jumped in ahead of everybody else with Prince Henry of Portugal and really primarily Charles the First in Spain. Uh, but in the end, despite the victory for Spain in that rivalry, and it really began their relatively rapid decline, especially with Philip II's failed rule, Spanish Armada, and really beginning soon after 1588 we begin to see the beginnings of this new rivalry. This new rivalry is going to be three-part. We have a French, Dutch, and English, and they're competing over both North America and trying to seize parts of the Portuguese Empire. So let's go ahead and just we're going to slow roll that. In addition to looking at that rivalry, we're going to also illustrate the impact. And the first part is going to be less about the rivalry and more about the impact, because really this all the countries in Europe really participated in this element and really had little competition. What we know about what we already know about Africa is only the coastlines are colonized, and we kind of see that area here. We see these areas, this area, this area, this area, and really the only exception to this rule is going to be this area here around Cape Town and what eventually is going to turn it into South Africa. The Dutch East India Company established a colony they thought would be a permanent colony in Cape Town, but they realized they didn't need it as a trade port. It was not a profitable stop, and soon the Dutch East India Company will abandon it, leaving the Boers or the white settlers to basically fend for themselves. And we have a unit that we're going to talk about this at the end much more. So my last little statement about that is only Cape Town really sees a large portion of white settlers, where the other colonies are going to be primarily just for trade stops. And despite limited colonization, though, the formation, the evolution of the transatlantic slave trade will dramatically depopulate Africa. Here is a map of the triangular trade. I know Dr. Spivogo really focuses just on the slave trade, which of course that's a significant portion. But I also want to point out that it also impacted their capital. So let's look. The triangular trade is a complex system of trade routes that connected West Africa, Americas, and Europe. And just want to point out that this is just one way that we see it. It is so much more complicated. But for my ninth grade students, I think this is the map I want you to know. The triangular trade, what we see, the Americas sent raw materials like sugarcane to Europe. Europe then manufactured those raw materials into manufactured goods, processed goods, such as sugar, but also rum. Europeans will then send those manufactured goods like rum and guns to West Africa, and in exchange for gold, salt, and African labor, then the African labor will be then sent into the Americas, and this is where we're going to see a significant African population that we really will populate this entire area. And the triangular trade, let's not, I see this map is really only focused on really the 13 colonies, but really it's all about this entire area, about the Americas. The Middle Passage is, for me as a historian, probably the most significant part of that. Here we see what a slave ship would have looked like packed in. We see the where the Africans are forced to sleep, the enslaved, side to side area. This is clearly, when we look at this, the whole purpose of this passage was to really dehumanize the Africans. You do hear some people say, well, the enslaved were able to spend time on deck during this time period for exercise. Documents don't really show that that's as true. I think that's more nostalgia or the invention of history that we kind of see. In reality, that this is a very controlled setting, and Africans were not going to be treated as in a human context. The impact of the triangular trade. Here we see a little bit more of the complicated aspects of the triangular trade. Really, West Africa is going to see the depletion of two factors of production. Remember, there's three factors of production we're going to focus on: land, labor, capital, throughout our class. But the two, what we're going to see is the loss of labor. This area here, we're going to see a loss of labor that goes along that middle passage, the enslaved, with millions of Africans trafficked into the Americas. West Africa is going to lose the labor needed to rebuild its economy. Followed by that, as they're going to be purchasing these cheaper European goods, the African cottage industries are going to collapse. So no longer are they going to be producing their own goods. With the loss of labor, now with this competition for cheaper sources, that means that capital is going to go that way. So it's going to take over 2 centuries for West Africa to really recover from this. So even despite the slave trade being ended in parts of the 19th century, by the time it's going to take time, and by the time they do kind of begin to recover, a new wave of imperialism will cover, starting in 1880s, really is going to ravage the country. But in the end, one of the reasons West Africa and even Central Africa is not going to be able to compete with the rise of Europe is because this dramatic loss of labor and capital. And again, for our class, that's really what we need to know. And that's going to be where we're going to pause here. This is just the first part of our discussion. So I'm hoping that makes sense to you guys. And I'm going to hit there.